wonderful to see such a strong gathering of friends, supporters, and champions of the arts here today. My name's Kurt Carricle. I'm co-chair of the board of the Cleveland Arts Prize. And on behalf of the board, I'm delighted to welcome you to this CAP Conversation, a new series which convenes Cleveland Arts Prize winners to provide an opportunity to hear directly from the creative thinkers and cultural leaders who are shaping the artistic landscape of our region. Before we begin, I want to extend a very special thank you to Cleveland Foundation President and CEO Lillian Curry and Senior Manager of Real Estate and Community Development Michael Hood for their willingness to open this building for us today. Their generosity in opening this building on a Sunday quite literally allows us to do this event. So we're very happy for their generous opening of the building. As tenants here in this beautiful building, we are so proud to be part of this remarkable effort to reach out to the community. We owe many thanks to Jeremy Johnson, who is here today, and Assembly for the Arts, who invited us to be part of their offices here. While I'm at it, I invite all the Arts Prize trustees to please raise your hand. Thank you. Today's conversation brings us into a fascinating intersection of creativity, place, and vision. We are honored to be joined by Scott Mueller, president of Dealer Tire, and owner, inventor, and creator of Rowdy Meadow, an extraordinary environment where art, landscape, and imagination comes together in powerful ways. We're equally pleased to welcome Alexandra Topalsky, director of Rowdy Meadow, whose leadership and expertise helped bring that vision to life, overseeing the care, curation, and installation of a truly remarkable and globally sourced collection of sculptures. She holds a very important role in this magnificent environmental installation. We thank you all for being here. We especially thank our VIP ticket holders for your extra generous purchase. The money raised by our CAP Conversations support Cleveland's Arts Prize to ensure that we continue our 66-year run in recognizing artists in visual arts, music, literature, theater, and dance, and design with $10,000 prizes, while honoring Northeast Ohio's arts advocates and supporters with special honorary prizes, which coincidentally presented to Scott in 2020 with the Martha Joseph Prize for Distinguished Service to the Arts. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Executive Director of Cleveland Arts Prize, Effie Nunes. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Scott and Alexandra.
Well, welcome everyone. It is so wonderful to see so many people here on a Sunday afternoon, so many familiar faces and new faces for our CAP conversation that we've been really looking forward to having with Scott Mueller, whose concept is, as you'll see, is the most magical place in Northeast Ohio, for sure, if not beyond that. And Alexandra Topalsky, who is the director of Rowdy Meadow, and we will hear all of the care, maintenance, and planning that goes into putting together and installing all of these incredible works. So why don't we get started? So I think we should talk about the most important part of Rowdy Meadow, and that's the land.
The diagram there, the map, is the original map and overview of Windsor White's estate. And at the turn of the century, he accumulated close to 1,100 acres in Hunting Valley. And it was called Halford Farms. It included everything from apple orchards, which a lot of the land I have is part of that, to a polo field and a collection of 50 polo ponies. And they had over 110 structures on the property. And when he died, that property was divided among three families, the Ingalls, the Rankins, and the Weil family. And what's nice about it is, for the most part, the majority of that land has been preserved. I was fortunate enough, and I lived in Daisy Hill, and someone said, why don't you walk through the woods and see what's on the other side? And I said, well, what is on the other side? And they said, Scotland. And I walked over there, and I'm like, holy smoly. And I'm like, from that moment I saw that land, I said, I am going to use the power of positive thinking to find a way to somehow obtain that land. And Mrs. Rankin, you know, she was such a steward of the property. She had close to 400 acres and preserved it and the meadows and so forth. So when I acquired the land, my first objective, I never set out to start a sculpture park, but I always wanted to build a home, and I was involved in land conservation through the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. So I started really with a landscape architect. And, you know, we set down a basis of what we could do, you know, to make sure we didn't screw the land up. That was the first objective. And the greatest part of the land were the birds, the migratory birds and the nesting in the big meadows. So that's where we started. And so it sets a context of what will follow later, and that is always to, you know, use the land to really inspire artists. And ultimately, it'll be a place where people can, the public will be able to go and experience, you know, art and nature.
Well, thank you. That's very exciting to think that this will eventually become a public place for people to visit somewhere down the line.
Yeah, I gotta die.
Oh, well, then we're not rushing that part.
In collaboration with the Cleveland Museum of Art, and this will be a place, you know, for them, you know, for their trustee and oversight over the years. So
It's wonderful. Well, we should talk about the biggest and the best sculpture on the land, and that would be the house. The house is just magnificent, and we're not gonna, that's a whole nother CAP conversation down the line, but we had to talk about the house a little bit, and maybe you can tell us, once you purchased the land and got familiar and decided where you were going to place it, what happened after that?
yeah, I'll say the house was the start of the insanity, in that, you know, it wasn't a sound economic decision or investment decision. But I always wanted to create or build a house, and I hired an architect named Peter Penoyer, who is actually, I collect contemporary art, but he was a classicist. And in my mind, I really liked the juxtaposition between, you know, contemporary and modern art in a really solid and classical environment. And I stumbled across, you know, I was very interested in turn-of-the-century modernism, you know, designers like Lutchen and Voisey, British designers, Mackintosh in Scotland, and then how they influenced, especially Mackintosh, the Viennese, you know, the Wiener Werkstatt, and in particular, a small group of artists and designers in Prague and Slovakia at the time that were known, this very unusual and short-lived strain of design called Czech Cubism. And so a lot of those motifs, you know, I call it a mashup of all those ideas, because that's what they really were, you know, a kind of, you know, riffing on each other. And so the house has, you know, this, you know, it's a symmetrical house, and it's got, you know, the white stucco massing in the steel. You know, the steel windows, and it doesn't take up much space. It's a relatively tight footprint on the property. We did a lot of things like putting the parking underground and hidden, so it would keep the symmetry of the house. You're seeing a shot of the pool, which was inspired by the Brion Chapel by Scarpa, who happens, a nephew happens to be a neighbor of ours, and I went to the Brion, you know, chapel outside of Venice to see the work, and so we use that stone massing. So it has a lot of these influences, and inside it's really reflective of, you know, like Rudolf Steiner and the geometry of a lot of different designers of the period.
How long did that whole process take?
too long. Well, there was a divorce in the middle of it, so that delayed some of the planning. But the good news about that divorce is it helped kind of really, it allowed really the designer, the Peter Penoyer and his partner, Gregory Gilmartin, it allowed them time to really build the detail. And what I was trying to create in the house was not so much it's not a small house, but it's not a large house by any stretch of the imagination. When you look at these big houses that are built today, each room is like a perfect livable size. But we really wanted it to be magical and each room to have incredible characters. So that takes time, with an architect. So that was the good part of the long.
Yes, so a lot of special materials too, I imagine. But let's get on to the grounds. And this is the current site map that you have right now. How many pieces in total for the collection?
Maybe about 52 currently.
52.
With a lot under price. Actually, that looks like my liver, that map.
Well, let's start taking a look at, I think we're looking at the first sculpture that ever was installed.
Yeah, and I got to give my credit to MoCA. Really, that's, being part of MoCA over the years was really the catalyst for me to become a collector, right? My first show when I was a board member was Nara. And I was so enthralled by his work and his ability to capture emotions. This is a piece by Ursula von Weidingswerd, who MoCA gave a great show to. It's the first piece. I remember walking in the rain with Ursula, spent like 4 hours out in the rain. And she had this idea ultimately to move from wood, which is a cedar, which is her core material she worked with, carving cedar, to bronze. And so this piece is molded after a sculpture she made out of cedar. And it was first displayed at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park where she was having a retrospective, and I thought, what a beautiful piece. So that was the first, and I would say it's like my exclamation point. It's really a beautiful piece. There's two pieces that are lit at night, and this is one of them.
Alex, maybe you can talk a little bit about the maintenance of this piece in particular.
Sure. I love this work because it's bronze, and bronze is very forgiving and low maintenance considering some of the other works that we have in the collection that live outdoors. We wax it. Actually, this work we are able to go about 2 years in between hot wax treatments. And in collaboration with the artist studio, watching the patina over time, it's a very easygoing, relatively low maintenance work. So that's why I like Ursula's bronze bowl.
And that's a great example of really exploring a piece. When you get up close, you see your hand in the wood. It's really, when you see it in a distance, it's impressive, but up close, it's even more magical.
Speaking of magical, tell us about this piece, because I know there were quite a few elements that went into this.
Yeah, this is called Psyche by St. Clair Semin. It's his take on one of the versions of Eros and Psyche, and in this case, Psyche is the canoe, and Eros is the snake that's carved around the canoe. You can't see it in the details, but he found this beautiful piece of marble in China, and he had the canoe hand carved by these, I believe they're Buddhist monks, and he had to build this contraption to carve it because it's 5 meters long, and then he made this beautiful base for it that's almost like Giacometti. And I said, St. Clair, that's really awesome, but it's marble. Can it go outside? It doesn't have a hole in it, for water to drain. And that's when he, being a good artist, whips out his drawings of his Greek Egyptian pavilion. And I'm like, oh, nothing's easy, you know. And he made these beautiful Egyptian columns. And it's example where the architect at the time, you know, St. Clair is not an architect, but he designed this beautiful pavilion. And the architect, you know, they so enjoyed talking to him and meeting him that they helped him realize it, you know, in a structural form. And then the landscape architect, we were building a pond. We had the idea then to put it, since it is a boat, within the jutting out into this pond, and they put granite around the base so it feels reflective like it's floating. So it wasn't easy getting in there, but it's really well sited.
And you can see on the right side, there's another sculpture that we're going to talk a little bit more about in a few more slides.
Sure, yeah, but I also just want to point out that this is a really nice view of the work that was also done with the landscape architects, Reed Hildebrand, and when Scott was planning out the property. You can see the drive on the right, which is the summer drive, which is kind of not the summer drive, sorry, the driveway, which leads up to the home, and then some of these sculptures. The Sol LeWitt was one of the also first, I think, sculpture that helped kind of create the layout of the overall property. The tree that you see is a tree by Ai Weiwei. It's made out of 3 different types of wood. It is natural wood, untreated. It's not petrified wood, but ancient wood from these forests in China where they've been sourced. It is an extreme challenge to maintain untreated wood living outside, you know, very exposed to the elements. Animals love it for you know, for homes. The raccoons, it's a popular place for the raccoons. So that's an example of a material that you would think is, you know, meant to be outside, but it requires a lot of attention over time. Here's another great one. This is one of my favorites. This is Sea Curve by Anish Kapoor. This did live outside of the Cleveland Museum of Art for about 2 years while on loan, waiting to come to site. At CMA, they discovered that at a certain point of the day, it would set the grass on fire, the way the sun would be concentrated.
It's a death laser.
Which, you know, while unfortunate that happened, it was good for us because then we knew that we had to plan for something like that. So before it was installed, we had completed a solar study for the site, and then we knew we had to put down gravel because we just didn't want to leave any chance for fire because this is not really a monitored location. It's not. There isn't really public there. Lots of wildlife are involved. And the challenge we have now, while we solve the one with the fire, the new challenge is turkeys. Turkeys love to fight their reflection of the work. And they spend hours doing this, which it's a real challenge to repair the damage that they've done to the surface, which is a 3/16 stainless steel. There's a proprietary way of maintaining the surface, which the studio is very secretive about, but we found a really nice partnership in the team that takes care of the bean in Chicago, which they just completed their cleaning, and if you go to Chicago, it looks great. And so yeah, so that's just an example of another great challenge of having artwork live outside.
Nothing's easy. By the way, it doesn't always catch on fire. It's really the summer solstice.
Yeah, we have yet to have that issue. So.
But the turkeys, that would be a really fun thing to have a video of to show.
I have many. I should have shared that. So anyways.
This is a view off in the distance of Roxy Payne. his tree. It's a 40-foot by 40-foot stainless steel tree. He calls them dendroids. They're like systems, like a nervous system, and it's really beautiful. This is the last, he claims, the last one he'll ever do. And it's really a magical place. And it's interesting that birds do nest, they don't nest on it, but they rest on it often. In the foreground, you can see an entrance to a piece. We'll probably, I don't know if we'll go to it later or next, is a piece by Jonah Freeman and Justin Lowe that's called A Cell Underground. The slides will kind of explain that.
Maybe since you mentioned birds, maybe we could talk a little bit about the actual name, Rowdy Meadow, and where that comes from.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a name that would make me sound like too much of an ass. And, like naming your property, it's not like, I don't know. When I grew up in Rocky River, our house was not named, okay? So the Muellers on Devon Hill Road, that was the name. And so, but, I wanted to create a name and identity of this sculpture park by this time. And so I tried to think of a lot of different analogies. This used to be almost all orchards, and, came up with names. But one of the great parts of the meadow were the birds, the bobolinks. And there are these amazing birds that come up from and that have a great song, and many poets have written amazing poems about the bobolinks over the years. But I saw read a poem by Emily Dickinson, and she referred to them as the Rowdy of the Meadows. And I'm like, Rowdy Meadow, that sounds, that's a good one. Okay, I'm taking that. So that's how we came up with the name, in honor of the little birds that nest there. That's
lovely to know that the birds are there and they're in that natural habitat. Now this is I think an installation that probably is maybe one of your most well-known, at least as far as I've heard from people who took tours. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this is Dam by Andy Goldsworthy, and Andy has the most sculptures on the property. He has, Six, yeah. And it shows the example. It's the greatest joy of, I collect painting, and painting, I like, and it inspires me and so forth, but you don't get to necessarily interact with the artist. When you're doing sculpture, it's really a relationship building. You really spend time. And in Andy's case, he spent, a week out on the site, exploring it. I gave him like a 4-hour tour, and then he said, "Get away from me." And then he went out and did his thing, and he works in nature, obviously, and one of the things that he really picked up on this land was the amount of river rock in the area. And also there was an old dam there that was a concrete dam that was leaking and cracked. So, he is very inspired by the power of water to shape stone, and how water can be hard and stone can be soft. And so he created, this idea, and he had this incredible team that Alex can talk about, these stonemasons from Yorkshire, and they spent back and forth a couple years laying, this is all dried, laid stone, across this dam. I think it's like, 90 feet? I don't know how many, but it's absolutely magnificent stonework. Do you want to talk about the construction?
They spent about 3 years over the overall time that the team was at Rowdy Meadow, working on their different projects. Like as Scott mentioned, it's dry laid stone over this existing structure. If you see the work, it's a very delicate curve to all of the stone, and it's really amazing the way that they were able to shape the material. And we have I think it was an old retention pond, yeah, for irrigation for one of the main apple orchards, and so we will plug up the pond at some point, so during the cold weather because we don't want freeze and thaw against the stone, and then we will fill it up again. So we've just filled it up for this season. And it's really beautiful when there's a lot of precipitation, a lot of rain. It'll create a beautiful cascade over the other side.
And Andy and his team of these Yorkshiremen really love living in Chagrin Falls.
Well, we're going to go on and talk about a few additional pieces, and we happen to be very fortunate to have one of the artists whose work is in Rowdy Meadow here with us today, and he is a Northeast Ohio native who started his education at Cleveland Institute of Art and then went on to the Art Students League and National Academy of Design in New York. He has works in Whitney Museum of American Art, the Dallas Museum of Art, our very own Cleveland Museum, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So I'd like to invite up T.R. Erickson to come up and tell us a little bit about his your work and also the piece that you have on Rowdy Meadow.
Okay, is that working? Okay. Well, you covered the first part of introducing me, so I'm glad. And I have these notes because I'm very good at digressing, and I don't want to do that. But I'm just so happy to be here, as I often am when I go to the property. I can't believe my involvement. Can't believe my involvement right now. But yeah, after I finished school, I started coming back to Ohio and was able to do all sorts of projects here over the years that really reached a kind of crescendo doing a show at the Cleveland Museum of Art at Transformer Station and then with Scott at Rowdy Meadow, which has just been, I really still don't know how to speak of that coherently. It's just incredible.
Well, I wasn't coherent when I decided to choose you, but
That explains a lot. The one thing I will say, if you remember this correctly, Scott, there was a piece of mine at that museum show that was interesting to you because it was a letter my mother, it was engraved in stone, and I declared it was not an outdoor piece, which it absolutely is. It's made of granite, but for some reason I said no, and then it led to this work, so all's well that ends well.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the thoughts behind your work, and then we'll show your work.
Oh, great. Okay. That's a painting. So I had stopped painting. I studied painting and then stopped around when my mom died. I was 30. And 20 years I stopped painting. I was working through photography and a lot of conceptual work. But I started painting again, and this was my first painting. I figured, why wouldn't it be of my mom and I? And I think we were on our way to Florida. I know we were on our way to Florida. It was about the only vacation my family ever took before they divorced. We went to Disney World, like you do, and this was from that time. In fact, I meant as an anecdote to tell a funny story that just happened to me. I painted another picture recently from that same trip. It's an image of Disney World, but Usher bought this work. I found out it's in a gallery in New York, and I thought, well, that's interesting, and I thought I'd tell the audience here because I understand he has a relationship to Cleveland. I did not know that, but he was part owner of the Cavs, and I don't think any longer, but he cares a lot about this place because I think some music mentors of his are from here. So I thought I'd mention that as a little entertaining anecdote. But yeah, well, that's the painting of my mom and I. But the actual work at Scott's property is more the kind of work I'd been doing prior to returning to painting. So I would work any number of different mediums. Many in here might remember Albert Albano. He was a dear friend of mine, and he's really why it was bronze. And I'll always be grateful to him for that. And much like what Alex says, it's just something we know what happens to the bronze. Unlike the work mentioned prior, I don't want anything done to it. I just love that the bronze is going to do what it does, and it's going to decay and change. Decay is probably the wrong word. It's very stable, but it changes in its appearance. And to me, that change is very beautiful because the letters that are engraved on the bronze, they also have yellowed and they age, and this bronze will do the same thing. So I wanted that to be part of the concept behind the work.
And it's such a fun piece to bring people to see, to read the letters themselves, and you know, you feel in a way your relationship through those letters.
Well, I appreciate that, and I've made other works with the letters, and in some environments you wouldn't imagine, like art fairs and cities, and the generosity people give to reading the letters sort of astounds me. But they give them a lot of time, and I've heard many things about people seeing these letters. One story I wanted to tell while I was up here was interesting because Scott told me one day that, I showed Richard Serra your work. And for a younger artist, kind of got my attention, and it sounded like Scott was going to say something else, but he did not. So I said, it wouldn't be like me, I would accept that, but I said, Scott, can you tell me what he said, And I'll leave it between Scott and I know what he said, but he found the work meaningful, which I was very grateful for that. And these kind of things I think are happening, and I'm not there, and I know that, and it's that itself is really meaningful.
That makes me wonder, have you ever had a reunion of all the artists to come together and meet?
No, we haven't. Some of them probably would like it, and some of them wouldn't. But we just published a book. Rado Turing, he used to be the curator, wrote a book, and he interviewed all the artists. So we were thinking about maybe we should have a celebration and have the artists at some point, those who would like to come. I think it would be a nice time.
We do have the book right there on the left. Not everyone probably can see, but it is magnificent, and it really does detail each and every piece and the artist's philosophy and inspiration.
Yeah, we really wanted to create the book to keep a record of the artist's voice for the museum down the road.
So why don't we talk a little bit about the installation of your piece? We haven't talked really about what is entailed in installing these pieces of this size.
Well, Scott has a wonderful team that, including Alex, that accomplishes these things. So there's not a whole lot I can say, but I can speak of it more conceptually. And the day that it was installed, what was so moving to me is that it just, like a letter is. Instead of an envelope, it was a wooden crate, but it was coming from somewhere else, and it was being unpacked, but in this far more large-scale way. And I was moved by the similarity of just being that they were letters. And I would just make on a personal note again, since my work is all personal. My mom, her life was hard and difficult. And when I'd come home, I used to drive her through these country roads. She was just a beautiful person, and her life around her never really matched the beauty inside her. And I drive her around these country roads, sometimes down where Scott, down those roads, because we were just up in Willoughby. And I'd drive down there, and we'd have this nice time together. But to me, the project, it's a letter, so it's her voice. And to me, the most, her part of herself is her voice. And in these letters, it really comes through in a remarkable way. And this was like having a place for her finally. That's beautiful. And it really, and thank you, Scott. I'll never be able to, it means more to me than I could ever say.
It's a beautiful tribute. It really is. So thank you so much for sharing, and we'll take some questions. So another Goldsworthy.
Yeah, so this is this piece called Red Hill that Andy always wanted to do. And when I first saw it on paper, in my mind's eye, this was a 15-foot tall hill. And I'm like, okay, that's doable. And then he's like, no, didn't you look close? It's 45 feet tall and 90 feet wide. And it's made out of the dirt from the basement of our house. And to build something like that is not easy because, it won't stand up, right, normally at that pitch. So we had to build it, in fact, in like 1 to 2 foot layers with fabric between like a cake. And then Andy's idea that long-term what would hold it up would be the Virginia creeper, the vines. We would plant these vines and, they would grow up and they'd eventually form like a cocoon to hold the soil in place. To get a steamroller at 45 feet required as much dirt as the hill entailed. So we had to build this, like, the siege of Masada, the giant ramp to get up there. And then, the challenge was getting the creeper, which is like, takes over everything, wouldn't grow. So we had to we figured out how to, not water it too much. We have to weed it. I have the world's most expensive weed picker, one of those sky cranes. But his idea is that it turns, green. It's budding right now in the spring, and then for a brief period in the fall, it turns red. So it's called Red Hill, and it's shaped on this old corner section of the property.
One thing I'd like to add is this is a nice example of, for Andy, this is a project he had always wanted to realize, but never could find the right situation to have it happen. And so when he proposed it to Scott, Scott was willing to take the risk to see this come to life. So there's a little bit of experimentation with this work because it is also, you're using plant material, where there's always risk with that. And so Andy's very grateful that Scott was was willing to.
Was stupid enough.
Well, he's very grateful, but it's an example of the kind of dialogue and communication of an artist with the right collector to make a project come to life.
I just love this picture, this winter scene of the piece, because it looks like a little pyramid there. So I appreciate all the scenic photos from each season.
And even though the Virginia creeper hasn't really done what the artist has intended for it to do in the fall, it's only turned red for 3 days in September 2019. We'll have patches. It really looks beautiful, in the fall with the full green leaves, but also in the winter, even when it's not fully covered with snow, the vines create a really interesting pattern. So there's always something that the work, offers with each season.
Okay, this is really when the tequila hits the road. So these are two young artists, Jonah Freeman and Justin Lowe. I'd originally seen an installation of theirs in Basel that they did of a burnout meth house in Ohio. And they created this, and they're narrative artists. So they create, in essence, this long-running narrative about different themes: Cold War, conspiracy, hippy-dippy underground culture, and futurism, and how it all comes together. So when they described this, it was almost like their pitch was almost as a movie script where they showed these scenes, and I'm like, okay, that's pretty crazy, but where are we going to put it? And they said, how about underground? It's all about the underground. And I'm like, oh boy, that's expensive. But fortunately, I had a buddy that makes tunnels. And I called him up and I said, hey, dude, do you have a spare tunnel? And he's like, strangely enough, I do. It's for the Charlotte airport, and the first X feet weren't used. So I'm like, thank you. So we the goal again was not to scar the landscape. So when we completed it, the meadow is exactly what it was before, but it's close to, I think, about 4,000 square feet underground in a series of rooms. And these are young artists, right? So this is I always say this is when you go from being a committed collector to a collector that should be committed. And you enter this chamber, and it's a series of rooms that they refer to as the Natural History Museum that shows the context of this narrative. And then as you wind yourself through this labyrinth of different rooms, I don't know if we have there's a data room, there's the study room. I took Dr. Mahalovic from the clinic. If you go back one, I took Dr. Mahalovic through the clinic. He goes, hey, I use that heart machine and when I started. It's like a defibrillator. And so this is there. And then if you go forward, There's like a Cold War room and a Cobra room. And it was a really kind of a wild construction project because we had, the team, from Red Hook, New York, and then combined with the Amish, creating like the rugs and the carpet and the drywall. So it was really a mashup of cultures to create this. And these guys worked for close to 2 years to design like this interior and this whole setup.
I'd like to add that we have one of our builders here, Joe Volpe. He's part of the Brooks and Henderson team who helped build the house and still working on all of our installations. And this was my first construction project.
Baptism by fire is how they call it.
The theater with their films and then this long James Bond tunnel that leads to the bookstore at the, every museum has to have a bookstore, and it leads to their bookstore. And then you leave the structure and you're immediately in this intense natural environment overlooking this ravine. So it's almost like you're cleansed of the center.
So do you, after a long, hard day, can you be found down there meditating or with a bourbon?
Someone said, well, if the big one comes, then if someone launches the nuclear war, you're going to go under there. And I said, I'd rather pop an iodine tablet and melt above ground than spend eternity in there. But it's a great piece. It's very, it's funny the reaction of, I took, the John Stern and David Collins from Storm King through, and I used to always joke, I said, this is not your grandfather Storm King to people, and I said to David Stern, this is definitely not your grandfather Storm King, but it really is a great, it's a great example of trusting these young artists with their helping see their vision come to play, and it really, and I think that's what you've got to try with. It would be very easy to get a bunch of DeSouros and put them around, right? But this is what I think what we're trying to achieve here is get artists from all different perspectives that can really have a little freedom.
Well, and what a great opportunity for these two artists to have almost free reign, it sounds like. Almost.
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much. This is a work by a Chinese artist, Zhu Zhen. He's based in Shanghai. His work combines a lot of Eastern and Western imagery to create like a final form. This is called, I think, Corporate 19, but we colloquially, on the project, all of the people working on it, we called it 1,000 Arms. But this is a good example of the collaboration between Reed Hildebrand and the artist, and also Scott, in sighting work. This is one of our more manicured installations and installation sites. This work sits within a room of beech trees, which I guess used to be in this area on the properties, if that's correct. And then this is also an interesting example of material failure when a work comes to the site. And while the studio thinks a certain material will withstand or do well in certain environments, this is an example of when it doesn't.
Yeah, Cleveland's cold.
It's a material, it's called jesmonite. It's like a concrete gypsum composite. You use it for mostly interior work. So within 6 weeks of installing it, the material failed. And we had, we're very, very lucky to work with great artists and, wonderful studios. And so in a conversation with them, they were willing to provide a bronze replacement. So 18 months later, we received the work in this bronze material, and then so it's bronze, and then it's painted with automotive paint. And so we have yet to have really any severe or serious issues with the work. But those images are from the initial installation. And the overall form, it's the, so there are 19, do you want to talk about it? There are 19 classical Western sculptures that some are in museums, some are just from pop culture. So you have like Medusa, Poseidon, you have Jesus, you have the Statue of Liberty, you have Adonis, and they all line up to form this Eastern figure, which is the Bodhisattva.
It's really striking. And as you can see, it changes in its environment because of the seasons that we are so blessed with here in Northeast Ohio.
This is an example of, a lot of luck. First of all, Kelly, my wife, her sister, was friends with Sarah, who's Richard's nephew and works with him and his assistant. And so he put me in touch with, they connected us. And Richard came out when he was suffering from a disease with his wife on a beautiful fall day. And it was amazing to watch his mind at work, just see how he thought of the land. As he'd like stop, yell at me, and driving around a gator, and he'd stop and get out and look and say something to his wife, too easy, and then he really was studying and understanding kind of the topography, the shape, and what he could do and what he could. And then I finally took him back to this one ridge line, and this land was originally sculpted by the glaciers. And he's like, anyone seen this? And I said, no. And he's like, I know what, I never say this, but I know what I'm gonna do. And then 3 years later, we did it. We had to build, he wanted a maquette that was basically 16 feet wide, 30 feet long, about 2 feet high of the topography. And we went to New York to see his idea, and he had a bunch of rulers stood up. I spent all that for those rulers. But, I said, listen, Richard, I'm not the king of Cutter. I can't, I don't know if I can afford your work. He's like, don't worry about it. I want to do it. So, in his generosity, he, probably cut it by 70% to realize, because it was, to build this, each one of those pieces are 50 feet tall corten steel that are 8 feet wide and 6 inch thick. They were
96,000 pounds each.
Yeah, 96,000 pounds each. So the crane to lift them is 260,000 pounds. And to get them in place, you could see on this lower hill, we in essence had to build a road to get them in there, which was which was very challenging to build that road and expensive. And then, Richard had to have his special crane operator. I said, we have lots of them around here, in Youngstown. Oh, no. And so we, of course, his special guy cost 10 times as much. But we laid this thing out over this period of time, and they laid it through. It's the only work I think he's ever done that's really in a forest, too. Part of it is. And which is magical, because when you see it on its side, the pieces are so monumental, right? But when you see it on their side, they disappear. They look like the hemlocks around there. And that's seeing it in different seasons. But he was actually, that's an example of an artist that he saw the beauty of the property, and in his imagination wanted to create something, to match that beauty, and was very generous with me to allow it to happen. Yeah, there it is, right on the middle. There it is on the side. So you can see something so heavy becomes so light and disappears. It's pretty remarkable.
Also, you think corten steel is like a really industrial, heavy material, as Scott mentioned, but each season the corten takes on a different color property. So I think this is in the summer, this is the 5th plate, and at sunset, it takes the sunset in a really beautiful way where it looks like it's on fire. In the winter, it's a very beautiful blue, all of the corten plinths. So never underestimate, what each season can do for the artwork.
So We see the one book, but you also, there's two books
Yeah,
about
right.
the property.
You know, if you're going to be arrogant, you might as well be really arrogant. No, the one book is called Rowdy Meadow. That's the book the architect wrote. He was, Peter Penoyer and Gregory Gilmartin, he's the dean of the Classical Institute of America. And, to him, I think this was his favorite project he'd ever worked on. And they really wanted, he's a historian, he's written many books about houses and different houses. He wrote a book on his own house, but he really wanted to capture the beauty of the house and the grounds. And then, as I said, the new book that just came out was written really to make sure that, 100 years from now, people will know what those artists thought or wanted.
It's amazing. I knew that people would wonder what's coming next. And you provided us with a few documents showing what...
The one on the lower right corner, that's a recreation of our tire store where I started, where I have a nightmare every other night. So it's over on 30th and Payne. And so it was our retail store. I grew up as a kid, with my dad and grandfather working. It was like a one-bay place, and we expanded a little bit. So the artist, Jonathan Berger, who's a really great conceptual artist, we talked about this, we got together, and it was like how, I had a novelty company when I was in high school, and he liked novelties, and we were doing and all about retail. So he's creating this 1/3 recreation of our tire store that will be clad in glass, and it'll be in a forest, and it'll kind of disappear. And within it, it's all these autobiographical products, like based on, my life, like, they'll be very satirical. So it's this like weird, and he uses craftsmen from around the world. So like one of the things I said, when I die, I want an aerial burial. I want to be shot up in fireworks. So, he went out and got these firework makers from Japan to make these like firework kits that will sell in the store, that you could just take your ashes and put them inside and go out and light away. So stuff like that. It's a very fun idea. So it's a long-term collaboration.
Another very exciting project is a project with James Turrell. We're commissioning James for 3 works that will be the anchor of a larger underground space. So it'll be another bunker essentially. There's a sky space, which I don't know if you're familiar with James Turrell's work, a light space, and a kind of another light-based work. But then the other rooms in the underground structure will host other commissions from other artists. And
after the one bunker, I thought I owed it to the universe to create something around the sublime. And I said, let's create heaven underground. So I thought of these artists that are all about slowing down and kind of opening a magic place of calmness and beauty and serenity. Turrell has popped up on the list, but it'll be an interesting environment. On the lower left, that's a piece that's will be installed this year by Doho Suh. We again spent maybe 8 years or 10 years going back and forth in ideas and this and that, and he finally came up with this idea to recreate his childhood home, except out of sticks, like a bird made it. It's called the magpie. And we took the sticks from the property and gathered them, and then he scanned them and made 3D printed versions, and then made them out of bronze. So it'll be a full-size replica of his house out of these bronze sticks. The other one will be going in this year. That's Julius von Bismarck. It's 4 columns that are 50 feet tall, and in the middle of the column will hang an ocean buoy, like the ones that go in the ocean, and it'll be placed in a forest. And there'll be a transponder on a buoy in Lake Erie. And so what I wanted to do was, I was telling them about this was all underwater with the glaciers, and so whatever the lake will do, this will silently mimic. So you'll have this big buoy like swaying, or if it's rough or calm, so it'll follow the exact patterns of the ocean.
Will you have any sort of a camera where you can kind of watch what is happening out in the woods?
No, it's on the Coast Guard transponder, so they have like a real-time feed at knowing what the lake is. Yeah, I had to call up the admiral and ask for permission, but unusual request, obviously. But
those all sound magnificent, and when things are installed, we'd love to have you back to talk a little bit more. So one last question. When is enough? When is Rowdy Meadow complete in your mind?
now my wife asks me that every day. And enough will be when I don't have enough money. So that's why I keep selling tires. Listen, I meet artists all the time, and it's like one of the great joys of my life to work with them, to talk with them, to exchange ideas, back and forth. And I hope to continue, pursuing these crazy dreams as long as I'm able. So.
It's wonderful, and it's nice that you're collaborating with the artists. I'm sure that artistic freedom is something they don't usually get from maybe a site or a commission.
No, I'm the drunken sailor they all love.
Well, we're going to take a few questions now.
Scott, it's nice to know you're going to go out with a bang.
Yes.
But in the meantime, when you have these very, very heavy pieces like the steel and all these pieces in bronze, do you have to create roads to get the heavy equipment in and then clear the roads so that it looks like they've never been?
Yeah, pretty much. There's a piece that, like we just installed. We didn't have a picture of it. Michael Heiser this year. That's 456 feet long, and we had to create basically this one area, really rough it up, and build, take these giant mats basically that you can drive heavy equipment on, to build that and it's embedded steel, 456 feet with, I think with 30 footers, right, to build that. But then, we're really careful then about reseeding and replanting, and then, hopefully in a year. So we just do sections at a time. So we're not disturbing the whole property anymore, just small sections at a time. We brought in a piece off of South Woodland by another artist, Tom Joyce. That was 104,000 pounds, and we had to basically build a steel road, to get that in and move the steel bit by bit. So it wasn't easy.
This particular question is for TR. The sculpture that you did, if I understand you correctly, was of an authentic letter, or,
yes.
Or is there, how many letters were on the sculpture?
Oh, well, 3 letters for each of the bronze plinths. Each has a letter, all written to me from Ohio and sent to New York in the early 90s. But my mother wrote hundreds of letters that I have of hers. I think I wrote her a few times, but I got hundreds of letters, and I've made a collection of them actually that are exact. I made very careful digital representations of them, and I have a 7-volume book I created in a very limited edition of every single letter. So that was the fidelity to the original letters, but the bronzes became more conceptual, memorial-like, but they are still exact in that they were all typed letters, and the engraving is exactly the typed letter. It's exact. Yeah.
Are there more sculptures forthcoming, or?
Oh, probably. My mind is always going, like Scott,
I will say that Tom has a great exhibition at Shaheen Gallery of his painting, so you should check it out.
Thank you. It was fun hearing about Richard Serra and his choice of, I want to have something here. Is that usually the way it works, or do you say, I would like to have something here, who might do it?
Well, It's a little bit of both now, right? I mean, now a lot of artists have been out and their friends have been out. So sometimes you get different ideas, you know, and introduced to the artist. But you don't tell like Richard Serra, I want your piece here, right? You know, he tells you what he's going to do and where it's going to be and how it's going to look, right? Some artists are far, you know, like here's Michael Heiser. He was very ill. He'd spent 40 years working on the city, you know, out in the high country in Nevada, and he got COPD as a result of it. Incredible land sculptor. And I was fortunate enough to get an entry. Emily and I went to visit him in Shelter Island, where he was trying to survive this COPD because of the, you know, exposure to the dust. And, you know, he tried to sell us something off the shelf, so to speak, a Gagosian special. And it was a beautiful piece, too. But I said, you know, we really want you to touch the land, right? We you know, I'm not interested in something that really doesn't have anything to do with the land. And, you know, he was probably initially annoyed at that, right? But then he thought about it, right? And he came back with, like, you know, we gave him maps, we gave him a video, we took a lot of drone shots, we gave him all the topo, and then he came back with a really great idea that he personally cited and came out and laid it out in the context of the land. And that's, you know, example, even though he's Michael Heiser and it was he's an incredibly influential, respected artist, you know, we wanted to make sure we pushed him a little bit and not kind of accept, you know, an initial draft. So sometimes you got to be gentle but firm.
What was if you remember, what was the first piece of artwork that you purchased that really caught your heart and your intellect?
That's a good question. We still have it up in our room. It was a little piece called Gray by Tom Friedman, and it's made with, it's just like an 8.5, like a little sheet of paper, and it looks kind of gray when you look at it, but when you look up close, he made it with 1 million dots of a Conti pencils, Conti crayons, 1 million dots. So if you look really closely, you see the color, and I'm like, you know, that was my dating strategy. It might be gray and blobby on the outside, but if you look close, there's a lot going on. So that to me was such an amazing, you know, piece. It was just, you know, that kind of got me going.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of art in your life in terms of historically? Do you have experience as an artist, or were you introduced to art that this has become such a major part of your life and such an investment?
Yeah, I had you know, my parents, you know, I went to the museum once in a while on a school trip. My parents, you know, didn't collect or think about art or anything like that, and nor did really I, until, you know, someone invited me to join the MoCA board, and I'm like, what do I know about art? And they're like, well, you know, you're creative, there are many creative people, including the artists, right? And so that's kind of got me going. And plus, my mom, you know, my mom's DNA, I think she collected handbags and slippers, you know, and like when she died, my brother's like, I can't believe Mom had like 30 pairs of shoes she never wore. And I'm like, listen, asshole, you have 110 cars. What are you talking about? So I said, we both got that gene from my mom. And the other thing I always tell people is I tried to take up golf, and by like my season of trying, by the end of it, I lost like, you know, 400 golf balls. And I said, I need a new hobby. This art stuff, they're always having it at fun fairs and alcohol's involved. I'm going to focus on that. So.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Alex, do you have any final thoughts? Or
I just want to thank Tom for being here today, and you know, it's so nice to have somebody with the Cleveland connection come back, and also Joe, thank you for being present, representing Brooks and Henderson, and for every hand that's involved in Rowdy Meadow, which there are many. we thank you for listening to our stories, and maybe there will be more in the future. So thank you.
Thank you both. I want to invite everyone to join us outside of Rise Conference Room, where we'll have refreshments and we can continue more great conversations. Thank you for attending the CAP conversation.